It's been really interesting to see the sort of high level of interest we've had in this topic, which I guess suggests to me that it's both something that's increasingly on the agenda for organisations, but also that there are some areas still areas of uncertainty around, what it actually is, why you try and create one, and also how you might actually go about it. I'm aware it is a big topic, so in the short time that we've got, the sort of next 45 minutes, we will try and cover all the relevant questions surrounding the topic. That said, there are many subtopics within this that we could easily do a whole webinar on in their own right. And so our intention is to return to some of those at a later date and do more specific webinars. So this is our topic for the day: creating a coaching culture, how all of your people can benefit from coaching, and what might that be like if you could. So my name's Neil Kimberley. I'm the Programs Director here at Farscape. And I guess my particular interest in this topic stems from the fact that, I do lots of one-to-one coaching and team coaching, and I see the benefits that it has for those individuals and teams. And I guess for me, I'm just genuinely passionate about how could those benefits be spread more widely across everyone in an organisation, and as well as all the stakeholders that are involved in the organisation, and how businesses could gain that business advantage by taking that approach. You see, I'm also joined today by Paddy Fletcher, who's the Senior HR Manager at Baxi Heating. And Paddy's role here today is he's going to share with us their story of how and why they chose to embark on the process of creating a coaching culture in their business. The results they've seen from it, the lessons they've learned. So, Paddy, thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing from you slightly later on in the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Good morning.
So, just to look at what we're going to cover then, I wanted to start by making sure we've got some clarity around, what this topic actually looks like, because it still seems that there's quite a high degree of uncertainty, in many areas of business. I guess especially for me, those that are not directly involved in HR and L&D. So around the real basics of what coaching actually is, and then also what a culture of coaching would actually look like. I think the second point then is important to discuss because it's the why bother question. With all the other projects you could be implementing, why would be attempting to develop a coaching culture be beneficial and one that's would impact the wider business as a whole. I think there's then obviously, I imagine, a lot of people are interested in, so what are some of the practicalities of actually setting up a coaching culture, and then getting some clarity on what are the outcomes, what do you want out of it, the purpose of doing it, so why do you think it's the right thing to do in the first place, what might the strategy be like, the how or the style in which you're going to go about it, and then finally the doing, the plan, what do we need to do, who needs to be involved. And then, as I mentioned, then we've got Paddy here, so I think it's going to be important to explore in a real, that will be the theory, but in a real world, how could a coaching culture sort of support the wider business strategy? And this, I guess, this is the point where we'll get to hear firsthand from Paddy and the journey that Baxi have been on over the last sort of 3 years or so, and what it's helped deliver for their organisation. And then finally, we're going to take a look at, so if you're going to enter into this, what's the sort of environment you need to sort of, assess what you've got and then create to help to make sure that the project is successful, and also what some of the barriers might be. We're going to take questions as we go through. So if you can see you've got your sort of chat box on the side of the screen. So Emma will be monitoring those for me as we go through. So if there's any immediate ones, she can come back to you if you've got any issues technically. But if we haven't covered your question by the end of the presentation, then we will be coming to questions at the end, and Paddy and I will attempt to answer those between us. Okay, so let's get started then. And we just wanted to sort of get some understanding really of the interest in this topic. So you'll see there on the screen a question. So where are you at in considering creating a coaching culture? So using your cursor, if you could just click on one of the radio buttons next to which one of those 4 statements you think relates most directly to you. And then when everyone's managed to do that, we'll pull up the results of that poll, because I think it's just going to be interesting to see where everyone's got to in that journey. So have you already got one? Are you in the middle of creating one? You're part of the process already? or are you just at the start of it, or actually have you thought about it but there's no appetite? I think that's more or less everyone is in there. So, could we have a look at the results of the poll? Interesting. Okay, so good to see that no one's gone for there's no appetite for one, and it's not on the agenda at all. I suppose an interesting question for me, Paddy, there is around whose agenda it's on. I mean, I don't know if it was the same for you, but my experience, the people I come across, is that it's often on the agenda within HR and L&D, but typically, my experience, not always on the agenda for the people at the top of the organisation. What was your experience in Baxi?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much the same, really. I think when we talk about our journey a bit later on, supporting our values, it wasn't one of the things that came to the executive minds in terms of what we could do. But I think through the business embarking on through that, we actually saw the benefits of it and introduced it to that population, and then they got it really and see how it could work. So I think it's quite interesting how in our world, the idea of coaching never came from the top.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's my experience too. And I'm making an assumption here, but I'm guessing the reason why people have said there's no appetite, I guess it's where that appetite comes from. But it's interesting. I'm guessing most people that are here today listening are either in the middle of the process and they're either having teething troubles and trying to think of tips and hints and things that have worked for other people, or they're at the start of that journey and just trying to think about what that process might look like. So hopefully we'll manage to cover that off as we go through the presentation. So let's move on then and sort of get stuck into it. So I thought it'd be worth you starting at this point, because I think there's still quite a lot of misconceptions about what coaching is, and where it sits as a management tool. And I guess we've just touched on that there. And I see this is especially at senior management level where, they personally may not have had personal experience of coaching themselves. So I think in my experience of talking to clients that we've worked with on on this topic and this project, is that before you even start contemplating going down this road of setting up a coaching culture, I guess you need to do some educating within the business to ensure that everyone that you will need at a senior level to sponsor the project knows what you're talking about. So where does coaching sit in on this this spectrum of support within an organization, from that consulting at the more directive end down to the the counsel and therapy at the other end. And I guess also just to draw attention to, I mean, I've only put sort of 5 bullets on there, looking at the different styles of coaching that might be employed within a coaching culture. So these are only a sample here to illustrate that. And I guess another part of developing your culture is having clarity yourself, whether that's from within L&D or HR. What are the coaching styles and techniques that are most going to match your organization's ethos and the business strategy that you're trying to support? And I guess the other thing for me around this spectrum is just in that role of educating is helping people to explore those what are often blurred boundaries between some of those approaches and the roles they can play. I think especially there, the role between coaching and mentoring, and when does coaching slip into counselling, in an inappropriate way. And I suppose also this is the right time to sort of identify that for me, I don't think that creating a coaching culture is necessarily the silver bullet to solve all of your company's issues. It can certainly help with a lot of them, but it's merely one tool out of many in sort of management toolkit. So there will always be a need for all of these different support approaches within an organisation. And I guess the trick for me is that they have the skill to select the right tool for the job, depending on the person in front of them, the context of the situation, the environment, and the outcome they're trying to achieve. So that's in terms of where we think coaching sits. And I think then just going a bit more deeply into coaching itself, on this idea of, so what is coaching? What's the definition of coaching, and the spectrum from a directive to non-directive approach? And I guess typically, again, for within the HR and L&D world, I'd imagine that most of us would see ourselves describing coaching at the top of that spectrum, being non-directive, around questioning to raise awareness, reflecting back, listening to understand. But I think you know, certainly like in my experience, and I guess in most of yours as well, coaching isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And so there is a need when developing your coaching culture to not hold on too tightly to a very prescriptive or narrow definition of what the act of coaching will be like when you're finished. So, you know, this directive, non-directive spectrum shown here, for me, can be quite a good reminder that, you know, effective coaching can take place anywhere along this spectrum, even if, you know, in our own minds, we might tend to spend most of our time at the non-directed end at the top. You know, so it's that example of, for me, you know, if you're at a house party and you want to know where the toilet is, then somebody else taking a coaching approach with you to try and explain, you know, get you to ask questions to where that might be, it's not going to be that helpful. So it isn't, you know, it isn't the only tool that managers can use. And I think that can be one of the challenges in this, is that by embarking on this route for it to be the culture, it's not always the right answer. There will be situations where you still need to be directive, to tell, to instruct. And I think that's just, again, important to draw attention to. I mean, Paddy, out of interest, now that you've embarked sort of your three years into your journey, what styles of coaching do you see happening as part of your coaching culture at Baxi?
I think, for me, I think we've got going on in the organisation as we, and I'm not talking specifically of in coaching sessions, but when you attend meetings and when you know, do different things and presentations around the organisation, there seems to be a different approach to those. So there's more listening to understand. I think it's good for us. Questioning, again, it's quite interesting to go into different meetings and hear similar questions being asked. So coaching questions being used in, not necessarily just in a coaching scenario, but in a, you know, in a meeting or even a disciplinary to that point, you know. So for us, that's the kind of real noticing, which is allowing people to sort of engage a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I think for us, that's probably getting up there in terms of that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to move on to sort of finish off then before we get into the how of it, is then what is a coaching culture? So I've just selected a sample here from the literature, probably going back to, again, around, as you can see there, 2004, the early 2000s. So I'll let you read through these first. So I think the thing for me that's sort of clear is obviously that, you know, there's been a lot written about coaching itself as a management tool over the years, but then obviously the idea of a coaching culture being embedded within a whole organization is a lot more recent. And I guess you can start to see there how over time the definitions of that have sort of moved on to where it's something that it sort of pervades the whole business. So it's a way of being rather than a set of processes or independent tools. And I guess one thing we'll sort of get into today is how long does that take to actually achieve? I guess, again, Paddy, question for you there. Within your organisation and your people, you know, they've been on the receiving end of this sort of journey for the last few years. How do you hear people defining coaching culture in your business, or do they even relate to it at all?
Well, I think you probably look at different populations. I think, you know, on the front line, I don't think people would perceive it as a coaching environment. They'd probably just see it as more of a sort of open environment. I think as you go sort of into the management team, because we've done some more targeted training around that level, they definitely understand more about what coaching is about, what a coaching culture is, and what we're trying to achieve. So I suppose it gets diluted as you get towards the front line, really. Right. But it was, you know, is it our goal that every employee in the organisation knows what coaching is and understands coaching? Not necessarily for us. It's about whether or not they feel that they're in an environment that we perceive as a coaching environment.
And then on the receiving end of it.
Receiving end of that, yeah. So some of them will, but the general population probably wouldn't. You know, they wouldn't be able to state the GROW model to me or anything like that. You know, they just know it's a different place to work.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. Right, so moving on to one of the other questions then. So why would you bother? And I've just listed a few things here. But before we move on to hearing from Paddy about their story and how they set up their coaching culture, I just wanted to share some of the current thinking around the practical steps and processes you might take when consider this for your own organisation. And I think at this stage it's important to set the project off on the right foot and gain genuine executive buy-in at that senior level. So I think there's a real need before you start to assess the potential business outcomes that will support whatever your current business strategy is. So what I've put on the screen here, these are just a sample that might relate to current projects and campaigns, culture change, things you might have going on within your business. And I guess assessing against some of these as to whether coaching would help, knowing your organisation, will then really help support you pulling together a business case and a need for coaching culture, if that isn't being already driven by the senior management. I think we'll hear a slightly different story when we speak to Paddy, because I know there was already good buy-in at the executive level there when Paddy started the process. But I think if you haven't got that, having some of these things as things that you can demonstrate would be the outcome and how they would support business strategy. So things around if driving creativity and innovation is a big part of your business strategy, then helping to create time for people to think, to have a more enhanced thinking environment is going to help there. I think we all know as well that a coaching style of management helps generate more autonomy and helps managers to delegate authority down to people, which in turn then generates more management time for them to be able to lead and take more of a future role in the development of the organisation. And even at just more general level, if you get it from sort of client engagement surveys that there are poor quality relations between low trust, then obviously anything that's going to improve the quality of relationships and conversations is going to help. So those are just some of the sort of the basic things that you might get out of a coaching culture. And I think the thing to think about is which ones for you would support the business strategy that's currently in play in the organisation. So if we moved on to okay, so you've made the decision that it is something and that there is buy-in. What are some of the practical steps? Well, how would you, if you've agreed it's going to be part of your strategy, what are some of the practical steps? So this is work that's taken from Peter Hawkins' work on this area of coaching cultures back in 2012. And whilst theoretical, I think it does set out quite a clear plan and path that you might take. Clearly, each organisation is different, and you might be certain steps along this already, so you might need to adapt this, and things might happen in different order. But again, in terms of coming up with your own strategy that you would need to present upwards, I think this can be a really good place to start. And I think it's quite a compelling guide. So it's just that idea of thinking of what's the experience of coaching already in the organisation, which typically will be external. So what is that provision? Is it ad hoc? How is the quality monitored? How broad is that pool? Is it creative in the way it can be implemented? Where does it just sit at the exec level, or is it deeper than that in the organisation? Then obviously, once people have got experience of what coaching is and what benefit it can bring, and I know Paddy's going to talk about that in his story, how do you then develop the internal capability? How are you going to do that? At which levels? Which route are you going to take to developing that? Is it going to be informal? Or are you going to go down a qualification route? So there's lots of questions in there. And then how does the leadership and management processes actually support the coaching endeavours that are going on? So how is that monitored, and how are you going to get the feedback as to how it's working? Obviously, then there's how that then develops into how the learning culture for the organisation and how your coaching culture will underpin all of that. And then there's the embedding it into the wider HR performance management processes, and identifying in advance where the coaching culture can support that, from feedback conversations Paddy mentioned there about people going through disciplinaries, and which other processes could coaching support. And then finally, as it then starts to become a more dominant management style. So I guess relating back to what Paddy said, is that people almost don't notice it's happening. It's not explicitly spoken about. It's just a way of being within the organisation, which is then that final bit that it's done across the whole business and engages with all the stakeholders. So as you go up that spectrum, you get that higher engagement and increased organisational learning. So I think that's just an interesting sort of plan to look at. I guess it'd be interesting to see. I know Paddy's model didn't necessarily follow this for various reasons, so I think it'd be interesting to hear a real world example in a moment. But just before we come on to that, a final one really to look at what some of the stages in developing a culture would be. So if that previous slide was the plan, how does this develop over time? So this is taken from David Clutterbuck's work last year on developing coaching cultures, where he talks about this idea. So the first stage is nascent stage. So this is where probably some of you might be already, where the organisation as a whole, doesn't really show any commitment to creating a coaching culture. So some coaching might be happening. It's probably relatively inconsistent, both in frequency and quality. Probably there aren't any great role models at the top of the organisation in terms of coaching as a way of managing. And then as you move into that more tactical stage, this is where the organisation is probably recognised or starting to recognise the value of coaching and having a coaching culture. But there's probably little understanding of what that actually means or what would need to be involved to develop it, what investment and time and money. And it's probably seen something that sits within HR and L&D. It's not seen as a wider management tool. And I guess then finally moving into that more strategic end where there's probably been some considerable effort, expended both to educate managers and employees in the value of the coaching, giving people more competence and they're more confident in a variety of different situations. And you've probably got most of the managers that you've accepted in the need to demonstrate good practice. And then finally, at that embedded stage, this is where people at all levels, you're seeing evidence of people engaging in coaching both formally and informally, within functions, across functions, within levels and, up and down the levels in the organization. And it's something that's used as a skill to sort of genuinely have learning dialogue across the organization. So the time that can take, I guess, will be different for different organizations depending on where you already are. So I guess it feels like this would be a good time to sort of bring Paddy into the conversation more directly. So Paddy, I just wondered from your perspective, if you could just give everyone listening the sort of context of your role and the organisation as a whole, and then we can get into what was your coaching culture journey like.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I work as senior HR manager within Baxi. I've been with the business a long time, 33 years in fact, but I've been in HR for 18 of those and now look after multiple sites. So as a business, what we do is we produce domestic boilers, heating systems. Just to give you some context of our organisation, the size of our organisation, we have 1,600 employees around the UK. And again, we have different dynamics and different things going on there. So we've got manufacturing sites in Preston, where we have about 400 people within press shops and paint shops and assembly plants. We have Hevo Sadu in Norwich, who have just over 200 employees, again, predominantly manufacturing sites. And then we have some smaller specific businesses. So we've got Package Plant Solutions in Milton Keynes, and they'll be doing quite heavy industrial heating systems. But aside from that, then we have more sort of service and sales within our business. So we have a small office in Ireland with about 12 people in there. Working in commercial, we have a commercial business that do commercial systems for schools, Premier Inns, that kind of stuff. So any commercial business they'll be doing there. And then in Warwick, we have our back office support and our central services, of which we have lots of things like marketing, finance, etc. But we also have 250 field-based engineers and 100 sales guys who are all field-based. So there's about 800 in there. So I think that just gives you a bit of a flavour for sort of the dynamics that we're working with when we're trying to sort of get coaching as something that we do. I suppose why it's important to probably understand at this stage that about 5 years ago we sort of, like most businesses, had a set of values, and we introduced those in 2012, and we had a mission and a vision. So we had a set of values that we agreed in the business and we rolled out. at this point in time, coaching was not it happened in the business, but it wasn't seen as something that we did predominantly around the business. So it wasn't thought of as part of our values. So we introduced these values and rolled them out, and it probably took it over 12 months to even just get those rolled out and communicated before we even started to think about coaching and how coaching could help us. So where do we see those values in our business? Well, the values were at the heart of everything we do. So you can see there, this is our strategy house. So at the top, we've got our commercial ambitions. Our values are embedded right below that in terms of this is the way we will do things. And then we've got our enablers and our pillars below.
So Paddy, just can I start? Yeah. What, out of interest, what was the catalyst then after having done the values that led you to think about having coaching as a culture within the business?
Yeah. Well, as I say, we're probably over a year into the launch of the values, and one of our service director who sits on the executive board and myself, we've gone through a journey internally, and he was looking at sort of how he could engage his workforce, and we had some conversations around coaching and and what we might want to do with coaching. That's just me and him as an individual. So the opposite to that was after a while, we both decided that we'd like to go and have a look at coaching. So we both signed up for a coaching course. Went on to that. We liked what we saw, and then pretty quickly we thought, well, actually, we'd like to get a qualification in this because it got our interest. During that qualification process, which took us probably 6 months to go through, I realised that a lot of the attributes and things that we were talking about within coaching could tick lots of boxes with the values. And this was the realisation just through being on the qualification, to be honest. So things like innovation, we knew in coaching it gets new ideas generated and helps you to look at things in a different way. We thought of trust and respect, and we thought, well, actually, coaching is actually showing a lot of respect for the other individual. So in the listening and the questioning, it's all about trust and respect. It's one of the values within coaching. So we thought it ticked the box there. Reliable and responsive. So the will bit in coaching, getting people to take action in coaching, gets people to start thinking about being more reliable and responsive and committed. Safety, for us, we adopt our approach to safety is in safety conversations. So we have a thing called swaps, whereby if we spot somebody who's doing something that's safe, we would have a conversation with them around what they were doing and what they could do differently and the impact of that. So that the actual coaching conversation itself worked really well with our safety conversation. It just naturally fitted. And then positive and passionate, we thought, well, actually, we knew how we were feeling going through the coaching process. So we thought, actually, coaching will make people more positive and passionate because actually it allows them to do things that they haven't done before. So you naturally get that as a byproduct of all the other things. So we thought, actually, it ticks a lot of these boxes. And having obtained our qualification, and we were at level 5 and 7 at that stage, and it was great having Lee because he sat on the executive board, so he was going back to the board and telling them how he was getting on his qualification, and already starting to talk to the board about some of these things.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, yeah, go on, Neil.
I was just going to say, so having identified that a coaching approach could underpin the values, what was the journey that then started after that?
So our journey, I mean, we spoke to our T&D manager, Maureen, and our HR director, who, as a team, as a HR team, it's one of our sort of core responsibilities to try and help embed the values. And we said before, this might be a really good tool to start to use in our managers, to start to help our managers act a little bit differently, because previous to that, our managers were pretty direct, I'd probably say. They didn't really listen. Our surveys were telling us that managers need to be more engaged in listening. So we thought this might help us to actually start to change the behaviours, which also fall in line with the values. So we had a conversation with them over a period of probably a month. We agreed that it was the right thing to do to start. So what we did, we then decided actually that we got me and Lee, who sat sort of towards the top end of the organisation, who now had our qualifications. Our T&D manager and our HR director also went on to do the qualification on the back of me and Lee. So we had a real understanding at top level what coaching was.
Right.
And then we agreed that actually where we should start to get the most impact was our frontline supervision team, of which we have about 200 across the whole UK. So we're here talking about people that supervise people on manufacturing lines or in offices and things like that. So we put all our frontline supervisors through a 2-day coaching principles course.
All 200?
Yeah.
And how long did that take?
Over a period of 2 years. We went into workshop, 10
right.
to 15 workshop, and we did that over a 2-year period. And that's still ongoing now because, as you can imagine, we have people joining the business, people being promoted into supervision roles. So we almost have a sort of, if you're going to supervise people in our organisation, then understanding the principles of coaching is something that is sort of foundationally mandatory at a foundation level. Don't have to have a qualification, but understanding what coaching is about is really fundamental to all of this at that level.
Right. So then, where have you got to now then in terms of this journey? What does it look like now?
Okay, where are we now? Well, I don't know. We had the interest at the top, and we sort of trained at the lower end of the organisation. You can see there we've got internal managers 2-day coaching, but there was a number of people that sort of had an interest in that, and actually we're really good at it. So the bit in the middle here, where we sort of say, okay, so where do we take people that want to do more than 2-day coaching? So we went off and explored the next levels, the gaps. And we ended up with we worked with ILM to do a level 3 and a level 5 coaching certificate. And in the middle there, where we've got internal coaching for managers and teams, that's where it becomes more voluntary, really, in terms of those who have more of an interest. So this wasn't just a sheep dip approach. So at the front line, everybody needs to understand, and then people who really want to progress within coaching have a model to work up or have some qualifications where they can start to grow really. And now we have probably 60 people at level 3 or 5. We have 4 people at level 7 in the organisation, and we've got another course at level 7 kicking off this year. So for me, it's important that if somebody really gets it, then they have somewhere to go with it and can increase the skill set.
So to get to this stage, how much time and money have you had to invest in the process?
Well, obviously in preparation for this today, I was talking to our T&D manager just the other day, and I was getting some broad figures off her. And we have a budget of 350k a year for training in the business. And over that 2 or 3 year period, she was telling me that she'd probably spent 130 to 150k of that budget, of that 3-year budget. So we're probably talking 20% of our whole training budget was targeted at coaching.
Right.
So
how much time has that been for people? So how many training days?
Well, again, we broke it down and we talked at senior level. We had 150 days right the way down to sort of front line 180 days. Where we ended up was we've got 490 roughly training days associated to coaching. So in broad terms, about 500 days, of which we're still going. Really.
Right.
So it is an investment, but as you'll see from our results, it's one that we think is worth it. Really.
So what have been some of the outcomes from that? I guess most businesses want to see a return on their investment. So I know that wasn't necessarily the reason you went into that, because it was more about supporting the values. But what commercial benefits have you seen?
Yeah, as I say, for us it was all about changing behaviour. So I suppose we never really set some financial targets in terms of profit or loss or anything like that. But what we did do, we wanted to see some behaviours and changes. And what we have noticed is that I'll just tell you about a few really. We have an employee survey every year, and our engagement scores have gone up over 10 points in the last 2 years. So
wow.
We're up in the sort of 75, 80 for engagement scores in our survey, which is massive for us. And that was one of our key drivers for doing it. Our employee retention is at 12%, or turnover is at 12%, so that used to be at 17. So that 3 years ago was about 17, now it's at 12. So we think that coaching is allowing people to progress in the organisation, because we've seen that as well. So if I just talk about, I mean, I've been coaching 5 individuals this year, and 3 of those have gone on to larger roles within the business. So we've had a project manager go into a business development manager role in the field. So again, you know, we're saving the whole recruitment piece, but equally we're getting some individuals in the business because there's opportunity.
So helping develop the talent as well.
Yeah. Probably one of our biggest achievements is safety. I mean, we've had a 70% reduction in number of safety incidents over the 3 years, and I wouldn't really say that's all down to coaching, because we have lots of things going on in terms of investigation and reporting that helps that. But we really believe the conversation around safety is really key to that in terms of changing behaviour and mindset. One personal one for me, because I'm in HR, is probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was pretty regularly involved in disciplinary, probably 1 or 2 a month, and I was, well, recently, if you asked me when I last did a disciplinary, I couldn't really recall. So they are happening, but I'm not involved. I'm not having to be drawn into those things. But we were a clear indicator that actually, we're getting less disciplinary and more solution focused outcomes from that. To the point where I was talking to somebody last week, and they said they were in a disciplinary and they were hearing coaching questions. They come to talk to me about the coaching questions they'd heard in the disciplinary, and rather than a sanction at the end of the disciplinary, they actually had a development plan. So for me, that was, without actually measuring it, that was a clear indicator that we've moved some way in areas like that.
So if those are some of the benefits you've had, I mean, if you look back now, what have been some of the challenges, and what might you've done differently with what you've learned?
I think probably the challenges are more around probably attitude, I suppose, and belief around coaching. We were quite fortunate, I think, because we'd already got some buy-in at the top.
Yeah.
In terms of Lee and his part in that. But there is stigmas associated to coaching. Sometimes people see it as a bit woolly. Certainly in manufacturing environments, I tend to think people see it as a bit woolly and time consuming. So I suppose getting people to see the benefits of it is key. And we've done that by demonstration, I suppose, in terms of, you look at the people who take coaching seriously in our organisation and the people that have attended coaching. When you see people moving up in the organisation and you see things changing, I don't think it's it's not by chance that people start to see some benefits in it. And I think for me, it's winning hearts and minds probably is a key one. And that, in our organisation, that's done by displaying the results really.
Someone's just asked the question, actually. You mentioned about increasing the engagement scores. And I know for safety, you said that the improvement in safety wasn't just down to coaching. In terms of the engagement, were there other activities going on, or do you think coaching was the main driver of that engagement score?
I mean, as part of our values thing, we certainly started to communicate more. So we communicated more in the business. But I think even, it supports that even. So we introduced monthly briefs and things like that. Whereas previously there have probably been just presentations. Now they're more engaging the audience. So teams will talk to them and ask questions about, rather than just presenting our stats to people. So I think it's difficult to align it straight into coaching, but when you see them happening, they're happening differently. I think that's probably my view in terms of what happens here.
Okay. So where do you see it going next? So you're 3 years into the journey. Where do you want to take it next?
Well, this year, we, believe it or not, 3.5 years into it, we're actually just now writing our coaching strategy. Okay, so based on all our experiences, we now have this model which I've got in front of you here. We now see how that works for us. So around that, I say, my view was, if somebody come into Baxi and said, "What's coaching at Baxi?" without having to spend talking to you about 3 or 4 hours trying to describe it, I never really had anything that said, "Here's what it is." So we've pulled a strategy document together now. So we're just doing that. In that, this framework was something that we've sort of made more visible now in the organisation. So we're also, what we've done is we've now got an internal cohort of coaches. So people that are at level 3 or 5 who have been on coaching courses can now put their names forward and become company coaches. and they will be assigned people that have actually request coaching in the organisation. So they're doing coaching more direct as opposed to just the day-to-day style, and that's been received really well within the organisation. So people are sort of doing that.
And are they given the time to do that?
Yeah. We tend to get a view that probably. I mean, I'm currently coaching I'm coaching 4 people, 4 to 5. One's just about finished, but we would expect these people to be coaching at least one person a month. So they might see them 2 or 3 times in a month. So we're not, as the numbers grow, obviously we'll move with that. But at the moment we've got 10 of these people, and they're all assigned at least to one person each. Some have got 2, and they're probably seeing them a couple of times a month. So that's the kind of time that we build into it. And because a lot of their managers are already in sort of not understand the coaching culture we want, there's never been a challenge for them in terms of time that way, not allocating time. And what we've also done is that we now do internal workshops. So myself, Lee, the executive guy, is actually helping me to pull an NLP skills course together for our internal coaches in October this year. So now we're doing more of trainer. So those of us at level 7 are actually starting to share more tools and techniques with the others. So we've got some supervision going on, Neil.
Yeah.
Peer coaching going on. We think it's important rather than just for us it's about being clever and using the knowledge in the business rather than going and spending money and taking people to this. We're now starting to design and share our own knowledge. We have a coaching library in the organisation, so people can get some research stuff, share tools and techniques. So it's all about continual development, really, in terms of the coaches.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's. I'm conscious of the time, so I just wanted a couple of last slides, and then we'll sort of come back to any questions that people might have for you, Paddy. So if I just move on for the moment. So I just wanted to sort of look at here. This is again from some work from. Peter Hawkins, who I mentioned earlier, and it's around putting some of the sort of pillars in place before you think about embarking on this as a process, and what might make the project successful. So I guess there's 3 pillars here. So the coaching strategy, which Paddy and I were laughing before about the fact that they've gone through 3 years through the process and now they've got the coaching strategy. But I guess if you were going to start from scratch and you were thinking about it, for me, the important bit there is understanding how does the coaching strategy fit in with the rest of the business plan. So I guess sort of sitting, if you imagine a pyramid with coaching strategy at the top, just below that you've then got, what are the development plans within the business, whether that's for people, developing talent, management development, leadership development. How could the coaching strategy intertwine with that? I think there's also getting some real clarity on which elements of the business strategy is the coaching strategy going to support. And again, you could be very specific things that you could pick out there. And then finally, I think, which is the interesting bit that came out, Paddy talking about the sort of the mission and the house and the values in their organisation, is what are the mission, how much clarity have you got on the mission and vision at that wider organisational level, and what are the values, and how well lived are those values in the organisation. And often, we often get called into organisations where the values just aren't being embedded and the behaviours aren't there. So again, how could the coaching strategy underpin the behavioural change that's needed to support those values, which came across strongly in Paddy's example. And I guess then the middle pillar, then that organisational culture change, is identifying what are the current behavioural patterns that exist within the organisation. What is the mindset that currently exists, both at an organisational level, team level, and down to the individual, and how closely aligned could that be to a coaching culture, or will there need to be some more education needed at that stage? Also assessing, what's the level of emotional intelligence in the organisation? Is that sort of degree of emotional intelligence and empathy sort of shown and modelled at the top of the organisation that would support that trust and that respect that Paddy was talking about earlier? And then also finally, really getting under the skin of the ethos of the business, and what are the core drivers and motivations of the business, Is it more performance? Obviously, all businesses have an eye on performance, but is that the sole driver, or is there a large element of, or is it more about the process? So I think getting an understanding and feel for that will dictate how your coaching, how you'd start to feed the coaching culture into the business. And then I guess finally, on a more practical level, is what are the existing resources that are there to support coaching? So have you got strong sponsorship at a senior level? Obviously, in Paddy's example, there was a member of the exec who'd got a coaching qualification, so knew what it was and could talk eloquently and positively about it within the exec. So to what extent does that exist? Have you got a strong management group that isn't just within HR and L&D that buy into this project, that would drive it across the organisation? To what extent have you got a community that are already practicing coaching? Is it that nascent stage where you've got a bit of ad hoc, inconsistent quality and quantity of coaching going on, or are there already people doing it? I think some of the practical stuff around places and spaces, if you're going to have lots of people having coaching conversations on a more formal level, where does that happen? And does that support the process? I mean, we've already done a whole webinar on how the environment impacts on the quality of learning, both in facilitation and coaching. And then finally, the systems of management. Is coaching part of those processes, whether that's performance reviews, feedback, development programs, all those sorts of development plans, and how does that all tie in? So I think assessing all of those three pillars before you start is key to the success of it. And then finally, I've just listed out here, I think Paddy touched on a few of these, and I'm not going to talk through them all in detail, because I think it's fairly clear how some of these systemic issues that might already exist within your organisation might hamper the implementation of a coaching culture, and therefore you might have to do some remedial work within the system before you could even contemplate rolling out a coaching culture. So I think we've talked a lot about senior execs. Do they genuinely understand what coaching is as a proactive tool rather than being remedial? Is the lack of understanding of how it works and what it can achieve? And I guess, is the existing style of leadership in the organisation quite autocratic? If it's quite a directive style already, whilst that might be a reason to introduce a coaching culture, that might be the behaviours you might need to address first already. And then a final set here, we talked about some of the benefits around that, better quality of thinking, more creativity and innovation. But if there isn't genuine support for that already in the organisation, where you might have an organisation where you're getting feedback from staff engagement around culture of blame and fear, lack of autonomy, that sort of thing, then again, those are probably some things that need addressing first. Coaching can be part of that, but if they're not addressed at all, then they're going to be significant constraints to that, coaching culture developing and thriving. And I guess, overall, it's just that the last one there for me is around, does the organisation genuinely have a culture of learning and development? And is it seen as a proactive, tool to drive business strategy, or is it just a nice to have that's the first thing that's, cut at the in times of difficulty? So, as I mentioned before, the whole webinar's being recorded. So those of you that have logged in today, you'll get a copy of this, so you can go through this presentation in slow time and have a look at these in more detail. But just before we finish, because I'm conscious we're sort of out of time almost, so I just wanted to return to some of the questions on here. What were some of the line managers in this process? So I guess probably not necessarily the front line, but the middle line as well. What were some of the common concerns from them around coaching, and how did you address that?
Probably time, because typically a coaching session, any coaching conversation is going to take more time than just telling somebody what to do next. So I think time is always a concern. I think there's some concern about, and not necessarily concern, but confidence. Mm-hmm. The confidence to be able to coach.
Yeah.
So having had this, it's one thing, going off and having a coaching course. It's a different thing when you're sitting in front of somebody who you don't normally talk to in that kind of way and starting to engage with them differently. So there's some confidence issues there, which is why in our workshops what we did was a lot of peer coaching. So an element of our workshop was always around every workshop that we did. We always made sure that we had more coaching sessions within the workshop, so they could practice. And I think for me, that's probably one of the only ways that we get over this confidence issue is to actually keep practicing it wherever we can. And then we encourage them not necessarily to think about coaching just as two people sat in a room trying to get to an outcome. There's lots of things like questions and listening that they could use in just meetings.
Yeah.
So we encourage them to use the skills wider than the coaching session, and I think that's when they start to get it more.
How is, out of interest, someone else has raised a question around, and I don't know what your performance management process and system is, but how has coaching been embedded in performance management and development plans and so on?
Okay, well, we have an annual appraisal system, as probably most companies do, and as part of that, we have a values discussion. So each of the values is rated. So the employee will rate themselves on each of the values before they come to the session, and then there'll be a conversation around the values within the PDR. We refer them to that. And I think, earlier on I mentioned the fact that our coaching supported all of those values. So by default, if you're having a conversation around the different values such as innovation and trust and respect, you're also having a coaching conversation in many ways. And each PDR, there will be a personal development plan that comes out of that. So again, whereas previously our managers just used to ask people what training they wanted, we now have more quality discussions around what is it you want next and what can we do to support that. So we've noticed a shift in training requests that come from the normal, I want some Excel training, to more broader areas such as communication and things like that.
Right, okay. One final question, a few really around this was, how did you, in that sort of, I guess this is in that middle tier where there was more of an investment in the level 3 and 5, how did you go about selecting the people that were sort of, encouraged to go on that journey?
Yeah, it's voluntary.
Right.
It's voluntary. So at the middle level, we have a senior leadership team of 63, and what we've also done, so if you wanted to go on a coaching qualification, that was definitely voluntary. But what we've also done is introduce coaching to other courses. So our managers will be going on other courses such as management courses, communication courses, whatever it is, and we will introduce coaching as part of that. So if we're engaging with a third party to come in and do some training, we will make sure that we've somewhere in there we've got the coaching bit, and it might not be specific in terms of the model, but there will be a coaching approach built into any training we do.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So I was on a course just yesterday, and we were about bringing our people with us, and it was our senior leadership team, but it was, it was all built around the coaching approach.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to think of other ways of getting the skills of coaching within training, other than just coaching courses. I think.
Yeah. So just as a way of sort of rounding this bit off, then, Paddy, I mean, looking back over the sort of 3 years that you've been on this journey, if there's people out there that are either just starting or just thinking, what's the sort of one best bit of advice that you've learned that you'd pass on to them?
Don't try and create the ultimate finished, polished article. So I think as you see in our journey, we've learned as we went, and I think what I'm trying to say is don't wait till you've got everything in place before you start.
Yeah.
So if there's a place to start, you can build your model and your strategy and all that as you go. But for me, it's get some actual stuff moving in terms of some frontline stuff, because then you can identify the people that really get it, get some engagement, you get some advocates. So I think it's key to have advocates. So for me, look for advocates, whether it's at the top or at the bottom of the organisation. If you can get it at the top like we did straight away, that's a massive bonus, because everything that we did then was pushing on an open door. So that, if I was going to go and do that, I'd start at the top and at the bottom at the same time.
Great. Thanks for that, Paddy. I'm conscious that we're nearly out of time, so I think we've covered off all the questions there. I mean, and obviously, any of you listening, if there are things that we haven't covered that you want to raise with us directly, then you've got our details now. So please do get in touch, about some of the more practical elements of the things we've discussed around, workshops and ways you might approach it, both internally and externally. I hope it's been useful to everyone. It's, as I say, it's a big topic, and I know that's been a whistle-stop tour through it. But as I say, hopefully we'll return to some of the more detailed sections on subsequent webinars. And finally, just massive thanks, Paddy. I think that your sort of story to share with everyone has probably been the most useful bit of the presentation. And I guess, as you rightly pointed out at the start, this can work in all sorts of organisations. I mean, typically the case studies you get to hear about are, large multinational, professional services firms that have large budgets and, large groups of people to implement it. And clearly the journey you've been on has shown that it doesn't matter what industry or scale you are, you can make it work.
Yeah, and we're not finished yet. We're not the finished article, and I don't think we ever will be. But as I say, we've definitely seen some benefits in terms of our culture change. So.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Paddy. Thanks to all of you for listening. And as I said, we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar. So if any of you had any technical issues, I know if you haven't got great internet speeds where you are, you might have had issues with the sound, because I know that's a problem sometimes. But I can assure you that the recording will be blemish-free in terms of audio, so you'll be able to listen to it back in your own time if you want to go through it. And I'd say, if you want to get in touch with us to discuss it any further or share some of your own stories, then I'd be more than interested to hear from you. I think it's a really interesting area developing across our industry. So thanks again, and we'll speak to you next time. Take care.